Good evening, my name is Barkha Dutt and you're with the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the issues that matter. We have been at the forefront of the reportage on the farmers' protest. In fact, it was this platform where Sidhu was first exposed for his extremist views. And on the program today, we continue to keep our eye on the ball. And the big question is this: as the Delhi police begins its probes, Delhi's top police officer has given an account of what actually went down on that fateful day. And we now have a number for those policemen who were injured. Take a look at what the details are now stacking up to look like. Close to 400 policemen have actually been injured, according to Delhi Police's commissioner, who has vowed that all those who broke the law will be punished. We saw today the Home Minister making a visit to the hospital to meet personally with many of those injured policemen, and we'll have those pictures for you up in a moment from now. You can see there the Home Minister emerging from the hospital where he's been meeting with the injured policemen. And remember that now it isn't just the farmers who've been on the streets protesting. We've seen in the last 24 hours the families of the injured police personnel take to the streets as well. The big question, of course, remains as there continues to pour in unequivocal condemnation of what happened at the Red Fort. What will now happen to the farmers' protests themselves? Have they lost moral legitimacy? Will the farmers pack up and go back? Will the farmers' movement now get factionalized? Or is this still a thorn in the government's side? Let's introduce our very distinguished panel today. Let me bring them on the screen one by one. We're joined by Manish Tewari. Manish Tewari is from Punjab, a Congress Member of Parliament, senior leader, former minister, writing a piece today in the newspaper saying Delhi has never understood Punjab, and that continues to remain the case. Remember, this is a conversation that's now gone well beyond the farm laws. It's become about, some say, playing with fire in Punjab, and we'll examine that in a little more detail. We have with us Neeraj Kumar. Neeraj Kumar has, of course, been the top police officer of Delhi, has seen many intractable situations in his life. And as the focus and the debate remains around how the police should have responded, could it have responded differently, could it have done anything differently, Mr. Kumar will provide us some invaluable input there. Sushant Sareen, one of our best-known strategic affairs experts, has been pulling no punches on what he thinks about the farmers' protests. He's not convinced that this is farmer-driven anymore, and we'll ask him why. And finally, I'm joined by Gurbir Singh. Gurbir Singh is an Olympian, he's an Arjuna awardee, and I think he brings to the conversation a non-political perspective from Punjab, and it's important to have all of that in mind as well. Now, what I want to do actually is start with you, Manish, because you started by saying Delhi does not understand Punjab. And I, as someone who's made about 15 to 16 trips to the farmers' protest, reported this from the ground, not giving you an armchair perspective, it seems to me that the moral force that was driving this movement has now been deeply eroded. And yet you're making this about the gap between Delhi and Punjab. Why is that?
Well, Barkha, thank you very much for inviting me on your show. The fact is that Delhi not only does not understand Punjab, Delhi does not even understand the rest of India. So that's an entire different debate altogether, which we may get into at some other point in time. The fact is that if you were to go back in time, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir, both of them being border states, and being subjected to different kind of depredations at the time of the partition of India, were supposed to get some special treatment. In Jammu and Kashmir's case, the special treatment was Article 370 and the guarantees which came along with it. Unfortunately, in the case of Punjab, from 1947 till almost 1965 or 66, that special treatment was missing. And let's not forget the fact that if there is one state or one people who suffered the most in the partition of India, it was the people of undivided Punjab, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims. More than 1 million people were slaughtered mercilessly in a span of 2 months.
I'm from a partition family, so I get that. What does it have to do with what does it have to do with what's happening today?
Well, essentially, what it has to do with what is happening today is that Delhi does not really understand the trajectory of how things have evolved in Punjab from 1947 to 2020. And therefore, if you do not understand the history, the culture, the impulses of a particular people, or the topography of the land, you will never be able to understand the genesis and the impulses which are driving this
So what
farmers.
is the impulse here? Where does it stand
The
today?
impulse is the impulse is very simple. The impulse is that the farmers or the farming community wants to live a life of dignity and honor. They do not want to be serfs on somebody else's land. And these farming laws are essentially designed to make them serfs on their own land, which they are not willing to accept.
So you know, as someone who's been reporting this story non-stop, I did flag early on that it had a lot to do with honor and pride and cultural assertion. But what happened at the Red Fort yesterday, Manish, with the Nishan Sahib there, hoisted with Deep Sidhu exhorting the crowds, and these pictures are never going to leave our collective memory. This goes against the very principle of izzat and honor that so many people from Punjab actually stand for. Families from Punjab routinely send their children into the military, into the security forces, and I cannot imagine this being defensible. I think the people who did this really let down the site, but the site has been let down, and this is an inflection point. How can you continue to talk Manish Tewari as if nothing has changed in the last 24 hours? And quick response from you, and then I want to take it to Sushant.
Well, Barkha, the fact is that nobody is condoning violence, or nobody is condoning what happened on the 26th of January. But the reality is that the transgressions of a few, howsoever serious or severe they may have been, and obviously the law would take its own course, cannot take away from the sense, from the very justified demands which the farmers have, and they have been protesting. While you look at that fringe which indulged in that wanton violence, we are not looking at the fact that 99.9% of the protesters actually have stayed peaceful for over 4 months. Even on the 26th of January, they were peaceful, right? There are some elements. Now, there are all kinds of theories which are floating around. One of the theories is that possibly they were instigated allegedly by people in government in order to delegitimize the protests. There is another school of thought which holds that when you have a movement where you mobilize people in such large numbers, and obviously these organizations do not have very deep roots, there are all kinds of elements who then try and sort of take advantage in order to sort of project their own leadership. Some end up in doing it in very stupid and imbecile ways, as we saw what happened on the 26th of January. But having said that, the fact remains that the entire Kisan Andolan is for a justified cause. And I think I explained the cause in great detail in the piece that I wrote today. It is about not becoming serfs on their own land, not becoming the slaves of oligarchs and sheballs, which unfortunately these farm laws are designed to turn them into.
Okay, you've said a lot of different things: history, culture, the sentiment, and the fact that what happened. Sure, I want to bring Sushant in, who actually believes that this is not about farmers anymore, right? And Sushant, you've been saying that from the first day. I don't actually agree with you, because I think that there were many different shades to what was happening. So there was the Deep Sidhu in the mix, and we'll play out both the video evidence of what he was doing at Red Fort and what he said to us in his interview, Sushant. But how can you not recognize the truth of some of what Manish has said, even if you don't fully agree with the way forward?
Look, I don't agree with it because, when the 1991 reforms happened, there was, and frankly, I had also been brought up and indoctrinated on the doctrines of socialism. And I was doing economics at that time. I don't know what economics I learned when I was learning socialism as economics theory. And we were taught in Delhi University that the Great Leap Forward was indeed a great leap forward, which by then it had become very clear that it was a disaster. But nevertheless, when the economic reforms happened, even people like me were quite furious, and we thought that the Congress party is selling off the country. That multinationals are going to come, eat everybody up. And clearly, we were wrong, and we should admit it. And something similar is happening as far as the farm laws are concerned. Now, one can have as many objections as one wants to have, but I think the government, after initially being stuck up on the laws, did reach out, and there came a time when the government said, okay, fine, let's put this in abeyance for a year and a half. And you tell us clause by clause, what are your objections? If the other side is going to play a maximalist role, not ready to compromise, not ready to reach some kind of an accommodation, not go forward on resolving an issue in a way that serves everybody's interest, then clearly there was something more to it at work than simply what Manish calls, izzat and all of that. Then there was this entire disinformation and this campaign which was launched that people's lands are going to be snatched. Listen, yaar, come on. You think Ambani or Adani is bothered about somebody's 2 acres of land in Bhatinda? For
But
God's
Sushant,
sake?
where do we stand today? Where do we stand today? It's gone well beyond the debate on the farm laws.
Now I think it's no longer about the farm laws anymore. I don't think it has anything to do with the farm laws or the farm economics, because if it had, no government can be entirely insensitive to as large a constituency.
What is it about for you? Your Twitter timeline has been arguing, Sushant, that this is being romanticized as a farmers' movement. If it's not a farmers' movement, what is it?
No. So 1 second. The romanticization bit is that farmer is the annadata and all of that crap. Listen, I work 12 hours a day. I don't owe anybody. Nobody owes me a favor. I don't do a favor to anybody by working with what I do. Mr. Neeraj Kumar was a police officer, would probably spend 18 hours, 24 hours on the field. He was not doing anybody a favor. He was just doing his job. Everybody is doing his job. Farmers are doing their job because that's what they do. And the next generation doesn't want to do farming. Most of the farmers or the big farmers, the SUV guys, are not even farmers, they're landowners. So this romanticization which we have done, I don't think we need to do that. We need to look at it as another profession. We need to make sure that it's economic. We need to make sure, take care of the welfare. We need to have what Geeta Gopinath calls a social safety net. All of that, I have no quibbles with that. Sure. But to say that, this is some kind of annadata, this nonsense of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan has been done to death, that is what I oppose. Everybody...
You're just being a cynic.
In this country, in every profession in which people work, people put in their share. And this whole country works because there are tailors at work, there are barbers at work, there are chartered accountants at work. There are all sorts of people doing their own thing.
Okay, let me just get a brief... Let me get a brief response from Manish, and then I want to go to Neeraj Kumar. Manish, do you concede that the moral force of this movement has been eroded? And I'm going to come to Deep Sidhu later, but I asked you this as someone I know lost your own father to terrorism, right? I don't know how many people know that about you. I've known you for many years. You saw the worst of Punjab's militancy years. Your father opened the door of his house one day and was shot. Right? You more than others should feel strongly about some of the crap that has been espoused by men like Deep Sidhu. Yeah. I want you to remember your own personal context before you answer my question.
Yeah, Barkha, I grew up on in the trench lines of the fight against terror at a point in time when nobody was willing to go to Punjab. I was then the General Secretary of the NSUI. And we took on the separatists and the terrorists. And there were many, many days after my father's assassination when we would go out in the morning, to campaign for what we considered to be our ideal, which was Punjab, Punjabi, Punjabiyat. We were not very sure whether we would come back home in the evening. So therefore, insofar as we were concerned, we were very clear that fighting for the cause of Punjab was one thing, and fighting against terrorism and separatism was a conjunct to that. Having said that, what I really fear is that we may have turned the clock back to the early 80s. Let us not forget the fact that the entire militant movement started off because of the Satluj-Yamuna link. The foundation stone of the Satluj-Yamuna link was laid, and then the Karpuri Morcha started. And the Karpuri Morcha then completely and absolutely spiraled out of control. And you had 15 years of militancy thousands of innocent people lost their lives. And what I am really apprehensive about is that we are putting the clock back. And let us not forget that there is Pakistan, which is always wanting to take advantage of an unsettled Punjab. Over the last 4 or 5 months, the number of drone dropping of weapons which has taken place in Punjab is absolutely nobody's business. And if you go by very responsible estimates, for every drone that the Punjab police has caught, it is their own estimation that 10 may have got through. And the weapons which are coming in are the Walther PPKs and the MP5s and close range weapons which will only be used for close range and targeted assassinations. And so therefore there is a entire different dynamic which has also started off concurrently. So under those circumstances, when you have an unsettled northern border, when you have the Chinese having transgressed into our territory, when you have Kashmir, which is completely and absolutely destabilized, if you are going to go ahead and destabilize Punjab, and let's not forget, Punjab still contributes 7.7% to your army. Forget the other two services altogether. And we are essentially a peasant army. We recruit from the very same stock, which are the people who are sitting on your borders now. And therefore, I had earlier written a piece as to how these farm laws are detrimental to national security. And I would like to reiterate those concerns with the fullest sense of responsibility that the NDA BJP government does not understand Punjab. They do not understand what they're doing. They are playing with fire. And this is going to have very, very serious implications going ahead. This is not something which can be dealt with.
So I thank you for that, because I think you've framed it in a. So Sushant, give me half a second, because I think there's so much to unpack in what Manish has said. But I just want to bring both Neeraj and Gurbir into the conversation, and then we can open it up. Mr. Neeraj Kumar, there will be questions asked. So I think we all agree that the stakes are high. I think we all agree that the stakes are much higher than the farm laws. There are any number of people who have warned against Punjab being pushed back to the 80s, which leads us to the question as to what the police should have done. Now, of course, in the end, to acquiesce to the tractor rally entering Delhi on Republic Day would have been a political decision, not the police's decision. There are two views of looking at how the police handled it. There are, of course, now, there's an official estimate, close to 400 policemen, the police commissioner says, have been injured. On the other side, farmers say over the course of these months, 80, that's their number. We have not independently corroborated it. 80 farmers have died from protest-related deaths, from the cold and so on, cold-related illnesses. This is their number. Again, I want to underline, in both cases, these are numbers that have been claimed and asserted by either side. What do you think of how the Delhi police responded, Mr. Kumar?
I feel, excuse me, for the first thing we have to appreciate is that the timing of the movement of the tractor rally into the city, I feel was timed in such a way that there was an intention to disturb the Republic Day parade itself. This people may agree or may not agree, but the very fact that hours before the time agreed upon, people left the borders and moved towards the center of the city. Yeah. There was a scheme or an intention to desecrate the parade itself. However, the police prevented that from happening. So this is the first credit that we should give to the police. The second credit is, of course, the kind of self-restraint that the police has shown in the face of the gravest of provocations. They have taken blows of themselves. They have jumped into the moat to save their lives. There are visuals where a lady inspector is standing in front of a tractor which is being loaded on by Mr. Rakesh Tikait to carry on towards the center of the city. And, she holds her ground and she does not allow that tractor to move. She tells the Kisan leader that, look, I'm also a farmer's daughter and you should not get into the city at this point of time. Because had these rallies been allowed to proceed, they could very well have reached Rajpath. If they could reach ITO, Rajpath is barely a kilometer or kilometer and a half away. So that is the other point. The third point is to be able to take so many blows on your own bodies and so many, assaults and not get provoked, not use extreme force is another great achievement by the police. In hindsight, we can always say, well, we should have deployed better in such a way that at least the Red Fort could have been protected and so on and so forth. But also understand that the police was spread thin. Bulk of it is deployed on the Republic Day parade arrangements itself. And the remaining of it, part of it was all deployed for the Kisan rally. So to protect a certain monument, which nobody ever expected to be breached, nobody ever expected that the farmers will reach there and try to climb the ramparts. I think the job done by the police is absolutely, worth our admiration. It's admirable.
Okay. We'll get a little bit deeper into that. I just want to bring in Gurbir Singh at this point. Mr. Gurbir Singh, you're an Olympian, you're an Arjuna awardee. You have represented this country with honor on the international platform. When you see the Nishan Sahib go up at the Red Fort, I'm not saying the tricolor was brought down for the Nishan Sahib to go up, but when you see the Nishan Sahib go up where only the national Tiranga should be flying, that sense of having stood for your country, I'm sure you felt pained, sir.
It is a part of the madness that is playing around all sides. Mm-hmm. I believe there is certain elements of which there was prior information should have been tackled before giving permission to let the rally go into Delhi. It is a police job. There were ministers, there were political people, there was police aware that Pakistan is instigating certain other minor groups. Mark my words, minority view was indulging because the whole atmosphere over the last few months had become toxic, was being made toxic, both by the extremist elements, mainly abroad, but also by responsible political spokespersons of the government, where they are saying time after time, these are Khalistanis, these are terrorists, Tukre Tukre gang. So the whole atmosphere for months had become toxic. Any officer who has been trained as a police officer or an intelligence officer knew what this would lead to. Although by a few people, all it takes is a spark. Please understand, I believe this permission should never have been given under these circumstances. It has damaged the image of India. It has damaged a just movement of the farmers. Now, everybody needs to put their heads down, cool down, take a restock of the whole position, bring in political intervention through talks, political talks. The talks that have been going on with the Minister of Agriculture, with the farmers, is not a political input. It is a technical input trying to say, we'll explain to you the laws. That's not a political. Where is the outreach being? So imagine the frustration that would have built up on the borders of Delhi over 64 days, 62 days till the 25th. The people and there's a mob gathering, increasing every day. So it was bound to blow up. Given the
So you believe that the government mishandled it, but the permission to actually enter the capital city should never have been given on a day like Republic Day. Am I right,
Mr. Gurbir? Or you had brought in adequate force, because the police had information of outside interests trying to destabilize and demonize.
But if they had
a
used
very-
that force, what would we be saying to them today? You see, the police was in my opinion, in a very hapless situation. But I want to do one thing here, since there's been a lot of talk about. You see, the problem with our country today is that we want to be either this side or that side. So we want to say all the farmers were Khalistanis. No, they were not. Many farmers I met were joyously and proudly carrying the Indian flag. But were there some complete radicals in that mix? Yes, there were. We have to acknowledge that there were some of them. Now, several weeks ago, the character called Deep Sidhu, whom I'd never heard of before, pardon my ignorance, I saw him in a viral video. I called him over. I interviewed him. I had no idea who he was till I actually started talking to him. And now this video footage is there. He's there at the Red Fort. He's exhorting the crowd to sort of get on and jhanda theek tarah se dikhao. The jhanda he's talking about is not the Tiranga, but actually the Nishan Sahib that goes up later. But he actually gave me an interview where he and I got into this mad argument over Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. So I just want to play out that clip, and then I want the panel to respond to whether the farmers' movement actually made. If we can just come out of that and go into to that particular clip now, whether the farmers' movement actually made a strategic error by not publicly. I know 2 unions did drop him, but was that the turning point to not oust people like this from the movement? Yes, you can call them fringe, but in the end, that video footage shows him right at the base of the Red Fort exhorting the crowd to go and put the Nishan Sahib up. So take a look at what Sidhu says on Bhindranwale. You don't think Bhindranwale was a terrorist? You don't think Bhindranwale was a terrorist? And you don't think legitimizing him like this is undoing the legitimate cause today that you are standing with and by for farmers? You see, this is the problem. The problem is that one thing actually totally dilutes the other.
I understand what you're saying, but see, how can we drift away from the truth? And what today we are fighting for, that's not even the cause we are fighting for. So what I personally think, see, that's what, I have a fundamental right to speak. What I personally think and the way I look at it and the way you look at it may differ, right? So we agree to disagree. But
we can't agree. We can agree to disagree on many things, including the farmers' agitation, where, by the way, I do stand with the farmers. But we can't disagree on an empirical fact that the Prime Minister of this country was assassinated by terrorists who wanted a separate country for Sikhs, that Punjab was scarred by that there was a golden temple, a beloved place of worship to all of us. I'm a Punjabi, that was occupied by terrorists. And that was sullied by terrorists like Bhindranwale. And, I had expected you to do an unequivocal condemnation of this terrorist and what he stood for. And instead, I'm seeing a rationalization and a justification, which I think is diluting and undermining the cause that you have stood for. And you are fighting the cause of farmers by confusing your own. I'm actually not sure what you're saying about Bhindranwale. Are you saying that Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was not a terrorist? Because then
yes,
that
I'm
is
saying that.
Now, at the time of this interview, Manish, even you were among my friends who felt that ye isko airtime kyun diya? A lot of people felt ki kya, and literally I had no idea who he was, so I did it in all innocence. Looking back, do you believe that this was a turning point, that what the unions needed to do was to get rid of people like this, and that these kind of people have actually let down the farmers who in the thousands have worn that Tiranga like a badge of honor? I called it a sea of Tirangas at the Singh border before what happened at the Red Fort happened. And I'm certainly not one of those who's going to call these farmers treacherous. I saw the sheer festiveness actually in their protest at the Singh border. But did they falter? Did the leadership of this movement falter by not getting rid of people like Deep Sidhu? And can they recover from that moment? And again, I remind you that you speak as a Congress leader. Indira Gandhi was assassinated. Your father was assassinated by the kind of men that Deep Sidhu is supporting.
Barkha, when I was younger, I used to see everything in black and white. Now I only see it in shades of grey. And I do not mean 50 shades of grey, but in shades of grey. Right. So, yeah. So therefore, again, going back to the partition, there is a, I wouldn't even call it a fringe sentiment, but there's a subterranean sentiment in Punjab. And that subterranean sentiment is that while the Hindus got Hindustan and the Muslims got Pakistan. We got shortchanged in the process. Right? That was the impulse which gave rise to the Punjabi Suba movement. That was the impulse which gave rise to the Anandpur Sahib resolution. That was the impulse which gave rise to militancy. Right? So therefore, there are a large number of such people, the kind you interviewed, who have been marginalized by mainstream political activism in Punjab. It is people like us, it's the Congress party, it is the Akali Dal, it is the Aam Aadmi party, it is even the Bharatiya Janata party. Mainstream politics marginalized them and kept them aside. But when you have a social upsurge like the ones which the farm laws created, these people then get space to be able
but
to.
They have unraveled the moral force of this movement, Manish. How do you not see that?
I don't think that a couple of imbeciles can take away from a just cause. I think that the movement will purge itself of such elements and be able to regroup and reconsolidate. As I earlier said, that what they are fighting for is an extremely just cause. It is not about barbers and fishermen and tailors, etc., as my friend Sushant Sareen was trying to trivialize it. The fact is that 84% of farmers in Punjab have less than 3 acres of land, or between 1 to 5 acres of land. As I did the math and explained it today in my article, all that they are able to earn with the minimum support price support is 15,000 rupees a month in order to keep their body and soul together. They supplement it by doing dairy and and some kind of poultry farming. But one thing they're very clear about, that those 15,000 rupees a month come with the dignity which goes along with being landowners. And they are not going to sacrifice that, even if some oligarch or shebal is going to come and offer them 100,000 rupees. It goes against the very grain and the very ethos of Punjab. As I was attempting to explain, why do you think that they have been sitting there on the borders of Delhi, braving cold and COVID-19 for 2 months? Why were they agitating for 4 months? Because before that, what was the need for this government at a point in time when they were fighting COVID, when you were supposed to fight COVID-19, to bring these laws surreptitiously through ordinances? If you had the conviction of courage, you should have brought these bills to Parliament. You should have debated them, sent them to the standing committee. There would have been a larger consensus. When you do not make laws in the legislature and you want to make laws, because you have the sheer majority of numbers, well, then you have to face things on the street.
Okay, let me bring in Sushant. Let's not get trapped into barbers and fishermen and farmers are like any other profession, or they're not. We're just well beyond that. My point is, we are well beyond that moment in this public debate now. We are well beyond even discussing policy. We are actually discussing whether Punjab is going to get a pushback to the 80s, right? I mean, we're discussing something as grave as that. And I want us to focus on that. I want us to focus on the role of the police. We've had two very differing perspectives, Sushant from Gurbir and Neeraj. Go ahead, Sushant.
Okay, Barkha, I think you have to organize a special debate between me and Manish on the merits or demerits of the politics of the farm laws. And I think we can discuss it because this is not the forum. Otherwise, we'll keep going round and round.
Yes,
so I don't enter into that debate. Suffice to say that I was in fact saying that when I say that don't romanticize farming, I'm not trying to trivialize farming, just as I'm not trying to trivialize any other profession which people do to earn a living. The second point is that, this whole business of attachment to land is not just specific to Punjab. It is true for Bihar. It is true for Madhya Pradesh. It is true for everybody in this country. People are attached to this land. That is what we are as Bhartiyas or Hindustanis, number one. Number two, let's come down. I'm more interested in the security side of things, as well as what has happened day before yesterday. I I would see as an individual, as somebody who looks at security very closely, I'm a little conflicted. I can completely understand where Mr. Neeraj Kumar is coming from when he says that the police showed a lot of restraint, etc., etc. And if the police had acted in the way the police should have acted, things would have spiraled out of control. I accept that argument, and the political fallout of that would have been much worse than what it is right now. However, as somebody who believes in a strong Indian state, as somebody who believes that the state must have the monopoly over violence, I felt extremely humiliated as an Indian to see the police force ill-equipped, to see the police force become a punching bag, to see the police force, not being led properly, and being literally let loose, having to jump into moats. I don't think that did any credit to either the police force, their training, the way they were running helter-skelter when the mob charged at them. I think there needs to be an introspection in the police force on why this happened. The fact that senior officers, in my view at least, let their men down, I think there must be some.
How did they specifically? Hang on. How did they specifically let their men down?
I'll tell you.
I get Neeraj to respond. How did they specifically?
You can't have 400 policemen being injured, being hospitalized, and nobody stands accountability for that. I think the least that the police commissioner maybe should have done is said that, okay, I offer to resign because I have let my men down. I have let my men get beaten up. I have let them become punching bags. This cannot be allowed because, look, the police force is to maintain law and order. If the police, and why was there not an orderly retreat? If supposing the police force had been given instructions that you're not going to get into, some kind of a scrap with these guys, you're not going to fire, you're not going to use the routine methods that you use for crowd control, then should there not have been some kind of an orderly retreat?
So the police damned if they don't.
Jumping into
Sushant,
their life.
Neeraj is going to respond, but do you not think the police is damned? If the police had used force, and I just want to focus on this a little bit. One of the stories, and we're seeing a big media fallout of this today. One of the stories that emerged in this fog of information versus disinformation was that farmers had been shot, right? There was a body. I just want to take a minute to talk about this and how complicated this day was for the police as well. There was a body, and the body was there. It was lying at ITO in the heart of the capital. The farmer said the man has been shot. My colleagues in my team came to me and said he's been shot. And I said, shot by what? Before whom? I said, shot by what? Because as far as I know, there were no bullets and guns in use. There were tear gas shells. And there was no clear answer. And mercifully, we were able to not get caught in this sort of cycle of disinformation. Later, we see a video, and I just want to take a look at this video of a tractor overturning, right? And the police says that the man dies because his tractor overturned. But by then, sections of the media had gone with the narrative that this man had been shot and the farmers were saying this. There were other farmers who were claiming, including to my colleagues, that they'd been shot. And once again, we had to go back to the hospital and there was no clarity. Now, my question is that in this absence of clarity, who is going to piece together whether the police overreacted or underreacted? Sushant, quickly, because I do want Neeraj, Gurbir and Manish to react to that, because I've heard both of these allegations. Underreacted, overreacted.
No, the police certainly didn't overreact. They underreacted very clearly. That is why they became punching bags. But the police did a very good thing by releasing that video as soon as they laid their hands on it. And that kind of left out the false propaganda and the fake news that was spreading all over. And frankly, Barkha, I think there needs to be, just like I said, there needs to be introspection in the police. There needs to be enormous amounts of introspection in the media, which is quick to jump the gun, which is quick to start pronouncing verdicts and start giving which is not verified. And this is not the first time this has happened. This has happened on umpteen number of occasions. And every time something like this happens, the media, goes back, goes into a huddle, tries to come up with SOPs, and then nobody is penalized for not following any of those SOPs, jumping the gun. So I think there has to be an all-round introspection. My only point is that I, as a person who believes in the monopoly of violence with the state, and I have a lot of problems with the Delhi police and how they behave with people, all of that aside, The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, it's a police force which is meant for my protection, right? And to see a police force being humiliated, being beaten blue and black, having to jump into moat to escape with their lives, being assaulted. I'm sorry.
What would you have had the police do? Let me ask Neeraj Kumar and Gurbir Singh, both who believe for probably different reasons that this was mishandled. Mr. Kumar, I'll come to you first. Sushant says the police commissioner should have offered to resign for letting down his men.
Barkha, just one sentence to Mr. Neeraj Kumar. A question, really.
Can we come out of this, please?
For him to say that the police force did not expect that somebody would come to the Red Fort and do what they did, even when there were any number of statements which were made. For Mr. Gurbir Singh, my question is that when he says that this permission should not have been given, should not the responsibility lie on the so-called farmer leaders who was one day a psephologist, the other day a journalist, the third day something else? Should they not have realized what this will lead to if you are going to carry out this kind of an agitation on 26th of January?
Let Neeraj Kumar answer that, because I do have certain opinions on whether a leaderless movement can in fact be controlled, and I want Manish to talk about that later. But Neeraj Kumar, lots of questions for the police, then Gurbir Singh, and then Manish, and we have only about 5-6 minutes left. So Neeraj, please.
See, if you go by the book, what we are taught in our academies while dealing with the crowd, that there is a threshold after which you resort to firing. If you go by the book, surely what Sushant is saying, is true, that the police should have resorted to extreme use of force. But can you imagine what would have happened?
I think the rally should not have been given permission anywhere near Red Fort. There I agree with you. On Republic Day, to give this rally, or maybe there should have been a cap on the number of people allowed, and those people should have been vetted by the farmers' leadership themselves. There were other ways to do this than to allow a mass flood of people. I mean, on Republic Day, most of us can't move around. Who is going to control this crowd, Mr. Kumar?
The point is, are you trying to suggest that if the permission was not granted, the farmers would not have marched into the city? Then the violence that you saw, in central Delhi would have happened right at the border, and the situation would have been the use of the extreme form of force. For sure, they were not prepared to, abide by agreements that they entered into with the police. And even after protracted discussions and consultations and agreements, if they still set out much before the allotted time, they exceeded the number of tractors that they had been allowed, how do you physically stop them? The only way to stop them is to open fire. Now, if fire had been opened yesterday, I'm sure there would have been
I don't think there was an option to use force. Exactly. I don't think there was any option to use force.
Police had no option really. If you go by the book, then yes. But you had to see the situation in its totality, the context in which everything was happening. And I think to that extent, the police did extremely well.
Okay, Mr. Gurbir Singh, please, sir.
I just want a couple of minutes to first respond to what I think is the malady. Like our very respected panelist, Mr. Sareen, to use words like this, naras like the Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan is all crap. No, that's not the way we should move forward. I would like to expand this to say Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and Jai Jai Khelwan. These are neutrals. These are ways, these are slogans to empower them, make them feel good. To say they're not andatas or dandatas is agreed. Everybody does a profession. Why honor our martyrs? They died at the borders being paid for salary. Please do not get into this. Do not mean the peasantry of Punjab, of India, I beg your pardon, provides us a lot of material that runs the wheels of our country. Please take it easy. Do not get excited. Number one. Number two, what Mr. Neeraj Kumarji was saying, that that police could have done more bundobast. They couldn't. What needed to do was every common man knew what was building up at the borders. The political input should have come in months ago, weeks ago, definitely a week before. All that was required was repealing of 3 acts, which you go back to Parliament. What was the problem? Where's the political input?
Can I ask you a question,
police.
sir?
You
Can I ask
cannot
you a
put
question?
police-
Can I ask you a
Yes.
question, Mr. Gurbir Singh? The question
Yes.
is this. This movement did achieve what some would say the impossible. What I will say with respect to Manish, India's political opposition has not been able to achieve. It got this government to back down. It got this government to blink. It got this government to say that for 15 months, we will hold these laws in abeyance, come and talk to us. Do you think the farmers made a mistake after that to keep on with their protests, that they should have taken that compromise and then gone to the dialogue table?
Okay, let me explain. Let me give you my view on this. All large mass agitations, whether they were led satyagrahas of Mahatma Gandhi during independence movement, or they were the BJP Rath Yatra, which led to the demolition of the Babri Masjid. The moment you bring such a lot of people together, no leadership on the spur counts. These small elements, fringe elements, like what they did during Mahatma Gandhi's time and what they did during the Babri Masjid with the presence of the leaders on the stage. This cannot be controlled. This is history teaches us. So you preempt, you dissipate the issue. It should have been done 4 months ago with less price to pay. 2 months ago, some price to pay.
That I agree, but that could be
a huge price.
Okay, now
because
what happens?
It's too late.
Okay, I have
Political
to start taking last comments. I'll start with you, Mr. Gurbir Singh. What should happen now? What should the
Yes.
farmers do? Should they pack up
I
and go
tell you,
back?
Yes, the farmers should not go back for their just cause in a peaceful way. The government should reach out to them. What I just saw was the Home Minister doing a wonderful duty, going to meet the policemen injured in the hospitals. I would very much like to see Mr. Tomar, our Agriculture Minister, if he feels unsafe to go to the borders, he should, the moment he shows some courage and say, I want to come and see you're injured, you will see the complete change of attitude. He at least should issue a statement. He is responsible for farming and the farmers.
I agree with. I do think governments can show softness.
That bonding needs to be created. That trust needs to be created. There's distrust.
Manish, speak now realistically about what you see are the options before the farmers' movement. We've seen very strong words, by the way, from Captain Amrinder against what happened yesterday, the Chief Minister of Punjab. Go ahead, Manish.
No, I think, Barkha, you've reached an inflection point. See, the laws have been stayed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has to decide on the very constitutional validity of those laws. The legislative powers which have been invoked by the government in order to enact these ordinances and then turn them into legislation are subjects which squarely fall in the state list. So therefore, if the government had any wisdom in it, the government would refer these laws back for consideration to the standing committee or a joint select committee of parliament, which can then call all the stakeholders and see as to what acceptable modus vivendi can be worked out. Or else, the Supreme Court could possibly hold a day-to-day hearing, which they will not, because as you've seen, even demonetization and the legal validity of demonetization has been hanging fire. You've seen that the J&K Article 370 matter has been hanging fire in the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court does want, it can actually hold a day-to-day hearing and decide on the constitutional validity of these laws. Because I am afraid, the thing is that at best, this is a temporary hiatus. The stake for the farmers is existential. So therefore, they are not going to back down. If anybody is under any misconception, I was just reading that the Delhi police has decided to level sedition charges against the leadership of the movement and invoke the UAPA. I mean, these are the typical bullying tactics which this government has been deploying against all agitators or all forms of dissent now for 6.5 years. But they do not realize the depth of this movement. Every village in Punjab had been mobilized. There are 13,000 villages in Punjab. There was not a single village from where 4455 tractors had not come. So therefore, they need to realize the gravity of the situation, the fact that Punjab is a frontline border state, the fact that, that Punjab has a history of militancy, the fact that Kashmir is destabilized, the fact that the northern border is destabilized at this point in time. What these people are doing is going to have very serious implications on
Okay,
India's.
I'm out of time. Neeraj Kumar, do you believe that anti-terror laws should be leveled against those who led this agitation? Yes, certainly against those who held the Nishan Sahib, but why the others, if that is indeed going to happen?
No, if it is being used against everyone, then I think I have issues with it. But I don't think it is being used in a blanket sort of way. That is one. And I would agree with some of the panelists that after such a major event, the police will do well to carry out a post-mortem action and what went wrong, even when the police were outnumbered, how to deal with those situations. All that should be done. And lastly, I wish speedy recovery to all my colleagues who were injured on the 26th in the mayhem.
Okay, got to close, Sushant quickly.
I think government needs to continue to reach out. I think the deal which they had offered, I think that should stay on the table and they should hold negotiations. Let the law stay in abeyance regardless of whether the courts are going to lift the stay or not. One. Secondly, I think they need to crack down on the troublemakers and make an example of them, including some of the leaders who actually were provoking the mobs to come, and many of them who are now trying to wash their hands off it. I don't think they can be blameless. They had given guarantees, they violated it, and you have to throw the book at them. And finally, and most importantly, I would strongly request all political parties in Punjab to understand that, and I agree with Manish, that we are at, I think we might have crossed that point of inflection. We are on a steep slope down. We need to arrest that slope. We need to wake up, smell the coffee. We need to understand that the way this entire movement was built up has actually roused sentiments of Sikhs in Punjab, including in places like UP, in Uttarakhand, in the Terai belt, including in places like Haryana. And we are really looking at a very dangerous situation developing. Political parties have also put their part in what has happened. I don't think either Manish Tewari's party can wash their hands of what has been happening. They have also put their hissa in this whole thing. The Aam Aadmi Party, Manish was talking about, political parties, mainstream political parties, marginalizing these guys. The Aam Aadmi Party actually brought many of this fringe element onto the mainstream. They gave them a stage in the last elections. We know that. We know, and that is one of the reasons why Captain Amrinder Singh, defeated them.
I think Manish is wanting to interject briefly, so I'll just let him do that. And
just
you
one
can
last
respond.
point.
Yeah.
Just one. So I think all of these guys, whether it's the Congress, the BJP, the Akalis, they need to know that there are certain things you don't mess around with. So you can do your politics and you can, go hammer and tongs at each other, but don't play with fire while doing this, which I think they're all doing.
Manish, briefly, and then Gurbir can wrap up. Yeah.
Unfortunately, with great respect to you, you see, there are nuances which I think escape a lot of analysts in Delhi. And one of the nuances is that it is not a bad idea in mainstreaming those people who were outside the mainstream till yesterday. After all, why have you signed an agreement with the Nagas? After all, why did we sign an agreement with people in Assam? Why did we bring Lal Dinga back into the mainstream? So therefore, you see, these black and whites that we try and put things into these boxes, those do not work in very highly complicated and nuanced and layered realities, which unfortunately Punjab continues to be.
I think we all agree that we're playing with fire here. I think we don't agree on what the best way is to douse the fire. Sushant, one sentence literally, and then Mr. Gurbir Singh gets to close.
In principle, I agree with what Manish is saying, but when you try to mainstream the radical fringe, what you end up doing is radicalizing the mainstream. We have seen that in places like Pakistan, where they tried to bring in the radicals into the mainstream. radicalizing the mainstream. I think we need to be extremely careful while we do
Okay,
something.
we're going to have a separate show actually on Punjab. Specifically, Mr. Singh, please, quickly. I've got to
just want
close.
say two things. Firstly, that Captain Amrinder Singh, 2 months ago, month and a half ago, met the Home Minister, cautioned him of the trouble brewing. The political input was again missing. Secondly, I would like to say the Delhi police cannot be blamed. They were definitely outnumbered, but the decision to let them in was political. So as somebody said, that Sareen said, that the Commissioner Police of Delhi should have at least offered to resign. I'm sorry, I don't agree. The decision of such a nature is always of a political nature. The political hierarchy has to bear responsibility, if at all someone has to. Now, I would also like to appeal to the government to be more sincere in their outreach to your own Indian brethren, the peasantry. It is not Sikh, it is not Punjab. Yes, they are more affected, but Punjabis have a temperament. They contribute hugely in agitations and protests, just as they did in the independence movement. That is their nature. We need to understand that.
Okay, so Sushant, were you wanting to add a sentence there?
No, I'm done. I wanted to just respond to what Manish was saying. I've done that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there.
Maybe you should have 2-hour programs, Barkha.
Yes, I know. I'll bring all of you back, but it was interesting, it was informative, and I think it brought home how serious the situation is. This cannot be trivialized anymore, irrespective of ideological and political differences. This country cannot afford to have Punjab slip back into the 80s. So we need a national consensus on this. And I think that it would not be a bad idea to have a special session of Parliament to discuss this. It would de-escalate. It might be a good way to proceed, but well, who am I? Just a journalist. Leaving it there. Sushant Sareen, Neeraj Kumar, Manish Tewari, Gurbir Singh. It's such a pleasure having all of you on the program. And for our audience, we will see you tomorrow, same place, same time. Thank you for watching. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.